James Carter leaned back in his leather chair, the faint creak of it echoing in the quiet of his corner office. The floor-to-ceiling windows of Sunrise Bytes headquarters framed a glittering city skyline, but his gaze was fixed on the stack of papers cluttering his desk. Customer complaints, employee grievances, and scathing online reviews formed a chaotic pile, each one a jab at the empire he'd built. At 42, James had turned a failing fast food chain into a thriving business with 16 locations across 3 states. Sunrise Bytes was supposed to stand for quality service, fresh ingredients, and a workplace where employees felt valued. Lately, though, the reality seemed far from that promise. 10 years ago, James had been hands-on, flipping burgers, alongside his crew, memorizing their names and checking every store himself. He'd bought the chain on a whim, a gamble fueled by his father's advice. Build something people can believe in. Back then, it was just 4 locations, bleeding money. He'd poured everything into its savings, sleepless nights, and a stubborn refusal to fail. His efforts paid off. The chain grew, profits soared, and investors came knocking. But with growth came distance. District managers and corporate reports replaced his late-night store visits. He trusted the numbers, the polished summaries, the assurances from his regional directors that everything was fine. Now, staring at the complaints, he wasn't so sure. The top letter caught his eye, its handwritten scrawl standing out among the printed emails. My name is Sophie Miller, a cashier at store number 7. I'm pregnant, and my manager humiliated me in front of customers for asking to sit down. No one listens. Please help. The words hit like a punch. James reread the letter, his jaw tightening. The details were vague, no specific names, no exact dates, but the desperation was unmistakable. He pictured a young woman, exhausted, clutching her stomach, her voice ignored. The image gnawed at him. He pushed the letter aside and opened his laptop, pulling up the latest performance reports. Store number 7's numbers were troubling. Sales had dipped 8% in 3 months. Customer satisfaction scores were tanking, and turnover was double the company average. His regional director, Paul Anderson, had dismissed it in an email last week. Just a rough patch. The manager's handling it. James frowned. Paul's too quick to wave this off. He scrolled through X, searching for mentions of the store. A post from an Angry Bytes customer popped up. Sunrise Bytes number 7 is a mess. Rude staff, cold food, 30-minute waits. Used to love this place. What happened? The thread below echoed the same. Overworked employees, indifferent management, a place where nobody seemed to care. James leaned forward, rubbing his chin. His father's voice echoed again, a memory from years ago when he'd been a teenager, working in his dad's warehouse. If you want the truth, son, go where it's happening. Reports lie. People don't. He'd ignored that wisdom for too long, lulled by spreadsheets and boardroom praise. But the complaints, Sophie's letter, the X posts, they weren't just data points. They were cracks in the foundation he built. He stood, pacing to the window. The city lights blurred as his mind raced. Store number 7 was in a bustling suburban strip mall, one of their highest traffic locations. If things were falling apart there, what else was he missing? Paul's email had promised a fix, but James's gut told him otherwise. He thought of his early days, standing behind the grill, joking with his crew. Back then, he knew every problem firsthand. Now, he was blind, relying on others to see for him. That had to change. An idea sparked, risky but necessary. He'd go to store number 7 himself, not as the CEO in a suit, but as one of them, a nobody, a new hire. He'd see the truth with his own eyes, hear it with his own ears. No filters, no reports, just reality. The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, mixed with unease. What if he was recognized? What if the problems were worse than he imagined? Or worse, what if he'd lost his touch? Too far removed to understand his own business. He sat back down, grabbing a notepad. Name, Ben Harper. Age, 35. Experience. Line cook, a few years back. He'd made a disguise nothing drastic, just enough to blend in. A hoodie, jeans, maybe some stubble. He hadn't worn anything but tailored suits in years. And the thought of trading them for a polyester uniform almost made him smile. Almost. The stakes were too high for amusement. He picked up Sophie's letter again, tracing the shaky handwriting. Whoever she was, she'd taken a risk reaching out. He owed her the same courage. If her manager was as bad as she claimed, they'd be out the door. If the store was a mess, he'd fix it. And if the rot went deeper into his district managers, his systems, his own leadership, he'd face that too. Sunrise Bites wasn't just a business. It was his legacy, and he'd be damned if he let it crumble. James glanced at the clock. 7:48 p.m. He typed a quick email to his assistant, canceling his meetings for the next week. Personal matter, he wrote, keeping it vague. He didn't need questions, not yet. He opened a job application portal for store number 7, filling it out as Ben Harper. The store was short-staffed, another red flag, so getting hired shouldn't be hard. He hit submit, his heart pounding. No turning back now. He stood, grabbing his coat. Before leaving, he tucked Sophie's letter into his pocket, its weight a reminder of why he was doing this. As he stepped into the elevator, the polished doors reflected his face, clean-shaven, tired, determined. By tomorrow, he'd look different. Act different. Be different. He'd walk into store number 7, not as James Carter, CEO, but as Ben Harper, nobody. And whatever he found there, he'd deal with it. The elevator dinged, and he stepped into the cool night air. The city hummed around him, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mind. Store number 7 was waiting, and with it, the truth. He didn't know what he'd uncover, but one thing was certain. Things were about to change. James Carter, now Ben Harper, pulled his hoodie tighter as he stepped out of his car in the parking lot of Sunrise Bite Store number 7. The morning air was crisp, but the strip mall buzzed with early commuters grabbing coffee and breakfast. The restaurants. Neon sign flickered, one letter dim, a small but telling sign of neglect. James adjusted his baseball cap, the brim casting a shadow over his face. His clean-shaven jaw was now dusted with stubble, and his polished demeanor had been swapped for a slouch he hadn't used since his college days. He glanced at his reflection in the car window, unrecognizable. Just another guy looking for a paycheck. Perfect dot inside. The smell of frying bacon hit him first, followed by the chaos of a morning rush gone wrong. Customers crowded the counter, their murmurs of impatience mixing with the sizzle of the grill. Employees moved like ghosts, their faces drawn, their motions mechanical. A young man at the fryer fumbled with a basket, muttering under his breath as oil splattered. A woman at the drive-thru headset snapped, "I said no ketchup," into the mic, her voice frayed. James scanned the room, searching for the manager, the one Sophie Miller's letter had hinted at. He didn't have to look long. Michael Hayes stood near the register, a man in his mid-40s with a permanent scowl etched into his face. His polo shirt strained against his frame, the Sunrise Bites logo warped. He barked orders without looking up from his phone, his voice cutting through the din. "Hurry up, Ethan. You're not getting paid to daydream." The young man at the fryer, Ethan, James noted, flinched but didn't reply, his hands moving. "Faster." Michael's eyes flicked to the counter. "Sophie, stop slacking. We've got a line out the door." James followed his gaze to a young woman at the register, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Sophie Miller, he realized, her name tag glinting under the fluorescent lights. She was visibly pregnant, her face pale, her movements deliberate. As she rang up an order, James's stomach twisted. He'd expected problems, but the energy here was worse than he'd imagined. The air felt heavy, like everyone was just trying to survive the shift. He approached Michael, clearing his throat. I'm Ben, here for the trainee job." Michael barely glanced at him, waving a hand. Yeah, we're short-staffed, so you're hired. Grab an apron, start at the grill. Ethan will show. You. No paperwork, no questions, just desperation. Another red flag. James slipped on an apron and joined Ethan at the grill. The kid couldn't have been older than 22, his eyes tired but sharp. "Keep the patties moving," Ethan said quietly, demonstrating. "Michael loses it if orders back up." James nodded, mimicking Ethan's motions. The heat from the grill was intense, but he focused on observing. Ethan worked with quiet efficiency, but his shoulders were tense, like he was waiting for the next shout. Across the kitchen, Sophie struggled to keep up with the line, her hand occasionally pressing against her lower back. An hour in, a customer's voice rose at the counter. "This is ridiculous. I've been waiting 10 minutes for a burger." Sophie's voice was calm but strained. "I'm sorry, sir, we're short-staffed. It'll be right out." Michael stormed over, his face red. "What's the holdup, Sophie? You're making us look bad." She flinched, her hand tightening on the counter. "I'm trying, Michael. The kitchen's backed up," he scoffed. "Excuses. Do your job." The customer sighed, shaking his head, and James felt a surge of anger. Michael wasn't helping. He was making it worse. As the rush slowed, James noticed Sophie leaning against the counter, her breathing shallow. She caught Ethan's eye, and he slipped her a bottle of water from under the counter, glancing nervously at Michael. Ethan's small act of kindness stood out in the bleak atmosphere, and James made a mental note. Ethan was someone to watch, someone who cared, despite the pressure. Then it happened. Sophie's voice, soft but desperate, cut through the noise. "Michael, please, I need to sit for a minute. My back's killing me." She stood at the register, one hand on her stomach, the other gripping the counter for support. Michael turned, his eyes narrowing. "You're pregnant, not disabled. If you can't stand for a few hours, maybe you shouldn't be here." His voice was loud, carrying across the restaurant. A few customers turned, their expressions uneasy. Sophie's face flushed, but she held her ground. "I've been on my feet all shift, just 5 minutes." Michael laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. 5 minutes? What's next, a nap? You don't get special treatment just because you made bad choices. The kitchen went quiet. Ethan froze. At the grill, his knuckles whitening. A woman at the counter, Jenny, her name tag read, smirked, her arms crossed. She was older, mid-30s, and moved with the confidence of someone who knew they were untouchable. James's jaw tightened. Jenny's smirk told him everything. Michael had favorites, and Sophie wasn't one of them. Sophie's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking to not pass out." Michael rolled his eyes. "You're paid to work, not whine. Deal with it." The words landed like a slap. Sophie's shoulders sagged, her gaze dropping to the floor. A customer muttered something to their companion, shaking their head. James felt his hands clench into fists, the spatula in his grip trembling. He wanted to step in, to tear into Michael. Right there, but he forced himself to stay quiet. He needed more proof, patterns, the full picture. Blowing his cover now would cost him that. Ethan broke the silence, his voice low. "I'll cover the register for a bit, Sophie. Go sit." Michael whipped around. "You don't call the shots, kid. Stay at the grill." Ethan hesitated, then backed down, his jaw tight. Jenny piped up, her tone saccharine. "Maybe Sophie should toughen up, Michael. She's always got an excuse." Sophie's head snapped up, hurt flashing across her face, but she said nothing. She turned back to the register, her movements slower, her spirit visibly crushed. James's blood boiled. Michael's cruelty, Jenny's betrayal, the customer's discomfort, it was all wrong. Sunrise Bites was supposed to be different, a place where people mattered. He glanced at Sophie, her hands still on her stomach, protecting the life inside. Her. She was the reason he was here, the voice behind the letter. And she was suffering because of a man who thought leadership meant control. He flipped a patty, his mind racing. Michael's behavior wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. The favoritism with Jenny, the way Ethan flinched at every shout, the exhaustion in every employee's face, it all pointed to a toxic culture. And if store number 7 was this bad, what about the other 15 locations? The thought chilled him. He trusted his district managers, men like Paul Anderson, to keep things running. Had they missed this? Or worse, ignored it? As his shift dragged on, James noticed more. The fryer was outdated, spitting oil dangerously close to Ethan's hands. The schedule board was a mess, shifts scribbled in at the last minute. One employee, a teenager named Caleb, whispered to Ethan about quitting. "I can't take this anymore, man." Ethan just nodded, his eyes distant. James caught Sophie wincing as she reached for a cup, her pain unmistakable. Yet she kept going. Because she had no choice. By noon, James had seen enough to know Sophie's letter wasn't an exaggeration. Store number 7 was a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Michael wasn't just a bad manager. He was a tyrant, and his reign had broken the store's spirit. James's plan was clear. He'd stay undercover a little longer, gather more evidence, then act. But as he watched Sophie struggle through another order, her face tight with pain, he wondered if he could wait that long. Something had to give, and soon. The hum of the grill and the clatter of trays faded into a tense silence at Sunrise Bites store number 7. James Carter, still cloaked in his Ben Harper disguise, felt his pulse hammering as he watched Sophie Miller slump against the register, her face flushed with humiliation. Michael Hayes' cruel words, "You don't get special treatment just because you made bad choices," hung in the air, a slap that stung every employee and customer within earshot. Sophie's eyes glistened, but she held back tears, her hand protectively on her stomach. Ethan Brooks, at the grill, stood frozen, his spatula trembling. Jenny, the manager's favorite, smirked from the counter, her arms crossed. The restaurant felt like a powder keg, and James knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He took a slow breath, his hands unclenching from the fists he'd been holding for hours. He'd wanted more time to observe, to gather every detail of this toxic mess. But Michael's cruelty had pushed him past that. Sophie's letter had brought him here, and now her pain demanded action. He stepped forward, his voice steady, but loud enough to carry. "I'll cover the register for a few minutes. Sophie, take a break." Michael's head snapped up from his phone, his scowl deepening. "What did you just say, newbie?" His tone was sharp, laced with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "You don't call the shots here. Get back to the grill." James met his gaze, unflinching. He could feel the eyes of the restaurant employees, customers, even Jenny locking onto him. Ethan glanced over, his expression a mix of confusion and hope. Sophie hesitated, her hands still on the counter, unsure whether to move. James spoke. Again, his voice calm but firm. "I just thought she needs a moment. She's been on her feet all day." Michael's eyes narrowed, his face reddening. "You don't think, Ben. You do what I tell you. Now move before I write you up." He stepped closer, his bulk looming, as if physical presence could shut James down. Jenny snickered, whispering something to another employee. The customers at the counter shifted uncomfortably, sensing the brewing storm. James felt the weight of his disguise, the hoodie and cap that hid who he really was. He'd planned to stay undercover longer, to dig deeper into the store's rot, but Michael's cruelty was a line crossed. He couldn't let Sophie stand there, humiliated, for another second. He reached up, slowly removing his baseball cap, letting his face come into full view. The stubble couldn't hide the steel in his eyes. "Actually, Michael," he said, his voice cutting through the restaurant like a blade, "I do make the calls. I'm James Carter, and I own this entire company. You just made the biggest mistake of your career." The restaurant went dead silent. A fry basket clattered to the floor. Sophie's eyes widened, her hand frozen on her stomach. Ethan's jaw dropped, the spatula slipping from his grip. Jenny's smirk vanished, her face paling. Customers exchanged glances, some pulling out phones to record. Michael's mouth opened, then closed, his scowl replaced by a flicker of panic. You're joking," he stammered, his voice cracking. James crossed his arms, his expression cold. "Do I look like I'm joking?" He turned to Sophie, softening his tone. "Go sit down. Take as long as you need." She hesitated, her eyes darting between him and Michael, then nodded, stepping away from the register. Her movements were slow, cautious, as if she couldn't quite believe someone had stood up for her. Michael's face twisted, a mix of disbelief and defiance. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" James cut him off, pointing to the door leading to the back office. "We're talking, now." He didn't wait for a response, striding toward the office with the confidence of a man who'd built an empire. Michael hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides, then followed, his steps heavy. The office was cramped, cluttered with schedules and unfiled paperwork. James leaned against the desk, arms crossed, letting the silence stretch. Michael stood by the door, his jaw clenched, his knee bouncing nervously. "Sit," James said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Michael dropped into the chair, his bravado crumbling under James's stare. "Look," Michael started, his voice low. "I didn't know it was you." "If I had, it shouldn't matter who I am," James snapped. "That's the problem. You humiliated a pregnant woman in front of customers. You've got employees scared to speak, customers walking out, and a store falling apart. Why?" Michael's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes fixed on the desk. "This job's high pressure. If I don't push them, nothing gets done. Corporate doesn't help understaffed, no support. I'm doing what I have to." James's eyes darkened. "You're not pushing people. You're breaking them. Leadership isn't about control. It's about giving your team what they need to succeed. You've created a toxic environment, and I saw it firsthand." He leaned forward. "Sophie asked for a basic accommodation, and you mocked her. I've got complaints piling up about this store, and now I see why." Michael's nostrils flared. "You think these kids respect me? They show up late, slack off, expect coddling. If I don't keep them in line, this place collapses." His voice rose, a hint of desperation creeping in. "You want to know the truth. Corporate sets impossible targets, then leaves us to drown. I'm holding this together." James didn't flinch. "You're the reason it's falling apart. And don't think I didn't notice the tip jar's empty. Where's that money going, Michael?" The question hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Michael's face paled, his fingers curling into fists. James had caught the discrepancy during his shift tips collected but never distributed. It wasn't proof of theft, not yet, but it was enough to rattle him. "You've got no evidence." Michael shot back, his voice shaking. "You'd come in here, play spy, and think you know how to run my store. You'll regret this." James stood, his voice icy. "You're suspended, effective immediately. I'll review everything's schedules, finances, complaints before I decide. Your future. Get out." Michael's jaw worked, but no words came. He stood abruptly, shoving the chair back, and stormed out, slamming the door. Through the office window, James saw him grab his jacket and leave, his phone already to his ear. A call to Paul Anderson, maybe? That was a problem for later. James stepped back into the restaurant. The tension hadn't eased. If anything, it was thicker. Employees whispered. Customers stared. Sophie sat at a booth, her hands on her stomach, her eyes uncertain. James approached, sitting across from her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded slowly. "I just didn't expect anyone to care, especially not the owner." Her voice was soft, guarded, like she was waiting for the catch. "No one should feel unsafe at work," James said. "Tell me what's been going on here. Everything." Sophie hesitated, glancing at Jenny, who was now avoiding eye contact, busying herself with wiping counters. Then she spoke, her words cautious at first, then flowing freely. Michael's management was relentless. Unpredictable schedules, denied time-off requests, and a culture of fear. He'd dock pay for minor mistakes, spilled drinks, late orders, claiming it was for carelessness. Sophie revealed one employee, a single mother named Maria, had quit after Michael cut her hours for requesting a sick day, leaving her unable to pay rent. Worse, Sophie suspected Michael was pocketing tips, though she had no proof. "We put up with it because we need the money," she said, her voice breaking. "I've got a baby coming. I can't afford to lose this job." James's chest tightened. Sophie wasn't just a name on a letter, she was a person fighting to survive in a system that crushed her. He thanked her, promising changes, then stood, his mind racing. Michael's suspension was just a start. The tip theft, the wage docking, the favoritism with Jenny, it all pointed to a deeper rot. And if Paul Anderson had let this slide, the problem wasn't just one store. It was his company. As he watched Sophie return to her booth, sipping water Ethan had brought her, James knew this was bigger than store number 7. He'd uncovered the truth, but now he had to act on it. And whatever Michael was planning with that phone call, James would be ready. The morning after Michael Hayes' suspension, James Carter stood outside Sunrise Bites store number 7, the neon sign still flickering in the early dawn. The parking lot was quiet, but his mind buzzed with the weight of what he'd uncovered. A store crushed under toxic leadership, employees like Sophie Miller fighting to survive, and hints of financial misconduct that made his blood run cold. Michael's parting threat, "You'll regret this," echoed in his head, as did the image of Jenny's smirk, her loyalty to the suspended manager a lingering concern. James wasn't just here to patch up one store. He was here to rebuild trust, and that started today. He'd called in a small team from corporate, HR specialist Claire Thompson and operations manager Lisa Bennett, who'd been the store's assistant manager under Michael. James had chosen Lisa for her quiet competence. She'd kept her head down but hadn't been tainted by Michael's favoritism. As he entered the restaurant, the familiar smell of coffee and grease hit him, but the atmosphere felt different without Michael's looming presence. The employees moved cautiously, their eyes darting to James, still processing his bombshell reveal as the owner. Before the store opened, James gathered the staff in the dining area, a dozen faces staring back, some weary, some skeptical, a few hopeful. Sophie sat near the back, her hands resting on her stomach, her expression guarded. Ethan Brooks stood by the kitchen door, arms crossed, his sharp eyes taking in every word. Jenny lingered at the edge, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous fidget. James cleared his throat, his voice steady but warm. "I know yesterday was a shock. I didn't come here to play games. I came because I heard your complaints, and what I saw confirmed them. This store's broken, but we're fixing it together." He laid out his plan. Michael was gone for good, effective immediately. A ripple of relief passed through the room, though Jenny's lips tightened. Lisa Bennett would step in as interim manager, her experience and fairness earning nods from Ethan and others. James addressed the wage deductions Sophie had mentioned, promising full reimbursement for any unfair cuts. "No one loses pay for honest mistakes," he said, his gaze lingering on Jenny, who looked away. Finally, he announced his scheduling overhaul shifts posted 2 weeks in advance. Time off requests honored fairly. "You're not machines," he added. "You deserve predictability." The response wasn't unanimous cheers. Ethan nodded, but Sophie remained quiet, her trust hard won after months of abuse. A young employee, Caleb, spoke up, his voice hesitant. "How do we know this isn't just talk?" Michael made promises too. Others murmured agreement, and James felt the sting of their doubt. He'd been too distant, letting men like Michael run unchecked. This was on him as much as anyone. "I get it," James said, meeting Caleb's eyes. "Words are cheap. Watch what I do, not what I say." He rolled up his sleeves, grabbing an apron. "I'm working the lunch rush with you today. Let's get this store running right." Ethan's lips twitched in a faint smile, and Sophie's shoulders relaxed slightly. Jenny, though, slipped out to the counter, her phone in hand. James clocked it. She'd been texting furiously since Michael's exit. A problem for later. The morning passed smoothly, but the lunch rush hit like a freight train. Orders piled up. The drive-through line snaked around the building, and then disaster struck. The main fryer sputtered and died, sending a plume of smoke into the kitchen. Customers groaned, their impatience crackling like static. Ethan scrambled to reroute orders, but the backup fryer couldn't handle the volume. James jumped in, manning the grill alongside Caleb, flipping burgers as sweat beaded on his brow. "Keep the line moving," he called, his voice steady despite the chaos. Lisa took charge at the front, calming irate customers with free drink. Vouchers. Sophie, back at the register, moved slower than usual, her pregnancy making every shift a marathon. James caught her wincing and signaled Ethan to take over for 10 minutes. "I'm fine," Sophie protested, but James shook his head. "You're not fine, and you don't have to be. Rest." She hesitated, then stepped aside, gratitude flickering in her eyes as the rush peaked. James noticed Jenny lagging at the drink station, accidentally mixing up orders. A customer snapped, "This is the 3rd time you've gotten it wrong." Jenny shrugged, her tone flat. "We're busy, sir." James's eyes narrowed. Was she slacking out of spite? Ethan caught his gaze, mouthing, "She's doing it on purpose." James nodded, filing it away. Jenny's loyalty to Michael was a ticking bomb. After the rush, James sat with Lisa in the office, reviewing the schedule board, a chaotic mess of last-minute changes. Michael had deliberately assigned grueling shifts to those who challenged him, like Sophie and Ethan, while favorites like Jenny got cushy hours. "He controlled them through this," Lisa admitted, her voice low. "I tried to speak up, but he'd override me." James handed her the board. "It's yours now. Make it fair." Lisa nodded, her jaw set, ready to prove herself. Next, James tackled staffing. Store number 7 was bleeding employees, and the fryer breakdown exposed how thinly stretched they were. He called corporate fast-tracking job postings and arranging temporary support from nearby stores. But hiring wasn't enough. The equipment needed fixing. He noted the fryer's serial number, suspecting Michael had ignored maintenance to cut costs. Another thread to pull out in a quiet moment, James approached Sophie, who was wiping down tables. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, grabbing a rag. She nodded, wary but softening. "Why'd you really come here?" she asked. "You could have sent someone else." James paused, choosing his words. "I built this company to be different. When I got your letter, I realized I'd failed you. I had to see it myself." Sophie's eyes searched his, Then she spoke, her voice raw. "I'm a single mom. My ex left when he found out I was pregnant. I've got hospital bills, no savings. This job's all I have, but Michael made it hell. He'd cut my hours if I complained, said I was too slow because of the baby." Her hand rested on her stomach, protective. "I wrote that letter because I was desperate. I didn't think anyone would care." James's chest tightened. Sophie wasn't just an employee, she was fighting for 2 lives. "You were heard," he said. "I'm setting up a company fund for employees in your situation. You won't have to choose between your health and a paycheck." Sophie's eyes widened, but she didn't speak, the weight of his words sinking in doubt as the day ended. James overheard Jenny on her phone in the break room, her voice hushed. "Yeah, Michael, he's still here. No, I'm handling it." She froze when she saw James, ending the call abruptly. "Just checking on my kid?" she lied, her smile forced. James didn't buy it. Jenny was feeding information to Michael, and Michael's call yesterday likely to Paul Anderson suggested a bigger fight ahead. James left the store that evening, the flickering sign a reminder of how much work remained. The fryer was fixed, the schedule rewritten, and hiring was underway, but trust was fragile. Sophie's story had grounded his resolve, but Jenny's betrayal and Michael's shadow loomed large. He pulled out his phone, drafting an email to Claire Thompson. Dig into store number 7's finances. Check tip records, maintenance logs, everything, and keep it quiet. If Michael was stealing, James would find proof. And if Paul was covering, for him, heads would roll. Store number 7 was breathing again, but it was on life support. James knew fixing one location wasn't enough, not when his company's soul was at stake. He glanced back at the restaurant, where Sophie was locking up, her silhouette strong despite her exhaustion. This was for her, for Ethan, for every employee he'd let down. And he wasn't stopping here. James Carter sat at the head of the conference table in Sunrise Bites headquarters, the city skyline a stark contrast to the storm brewing in the room. The polished wood reflected the tense faces of his executive team regional directors, HR, and operations leads summoned for an emergency meeting. It had been 3 days since James suspended Michael Hayes at store number 7, and the revelations from that single location toxic management, wage theft, and equipment neglect had ignited a fire in him. Sophie Miller's desperate letter, Ethan. Brooks's quiet resilience and Jenny's whispered betrayal haunted him. But what troubled him most was the nagging question. If store number 7 was this broken, how deep did the rot go? He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I went undercover at store number 7, he began, his voice steady but sharp. "What I found was unacceptable. Employees overworked, disrespected, humiliated. Customers ignored. A manager docking pay and possibly pocketing tips. This wasn't a one-off. It's a failure of leadership hours." His eyes swept the room, landing on Paul Anderson, the regional director overseeing store number 7. Paul shifted in his seat, his tie suddenly too tight. Room was silent, the weight of James's words settling like dust. Claire Thompson, the HR lead, scribbled notes, her brow furrowed. Megan Foster, another regional director, leaned forward, her expression troubled. Paul cleared his throat, his voice measured. "James, these stores run on tight margins. Managers, like Michael, have to make tough calls to keep things efficient. Sometimes that means pushing harder than employees like." James's stare didn't waver. "Pushing employees is one thing, Paul. Humiliating a pregnant woman in front of customers? Docking pay for spilled drinks? That's not efficiency, it's abuse." He slid Sophie's letter across the table, its handwritten scrawl a silent accusation. This came from store number 7. A cashier named Sophie Miller, 8 months pregnant, begged for help. "You oversaw that store, Paul. Why didn't I hear about this sooner?" Paul's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming the table. I got reports from Michael. He said turnover was high because of lazy hires, not management. I trusted him to handle it. His tone was defensive, a man used to deflecting blame. Trusted him? James shot back. You didn't check? You didn't visit? That store's sales dropped 8%, Paul. Customers are raging on X. You didn't think to look closer? Paul's silence was answer enough. James turned to the room. This isn't just about store number 7. If one manager can run a store like a dictator, unchecked, then our system's broken. And we're fixing it now. Megan Foster raised a hand, her voice steady. I had no idea things were that bad, James, but I'm not shocked. We rely on managers to self-report. If they're the problem, they're not going to flag themselves. Store number 12's been flagging similar issues. High turnover, customer complaints. I should have pushed harder. James nodded, appreciating her candor. Exactly. That's why we're changing how we operate. Effective immediately, we're launching a full review of every location. Anonymous employee surveys, unannounced visits, and a direct feedback line that bypasses managers. No more blind spots. Paul exhaled sharply, his discomfort palpable. That's a lot of disruption, James. Stores are stretched thin as it is. You'll tank morale if you start interrogating everyone. His words carry an edge, a subtle challenge. Good, James said, his tone icy. If disruption's what it takes to root out toxicity, so be it. I'd rather lose a few bad managers than keep a culture that chews up our people. Paul's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. James turned to Claire. What's the plan for? Stores with serious issues? Retraining? Or are we cleaning house? Claire set down her pen, her voice calm but firm. Both. Managers who can learn to lead better will train. Those who think abuse is part of the job. They're out? I'll draft survey questions by tomorrow, but we need to act fast. If store number 7's any indication, we're sitting on a powder keg. James nodded, then paused, his mind flicking to an email he'd received that morning from Claire's team. A preliminary audit of store number 7's finances had flagged irregularities. Tip records didn't match deposits, and maintenance budgets were unspent despite broken equipment. Michael Hayes' name was all over the discrepancies. James hadn't told anyone yet, not even Claire, but the timing of Michael's call to Paul after his suspension raised red flags. Was Paul covering for him, or was he just negligent? Claire, James said, keeping his tone neutral. Dig deeper into store number 7's books. Tips, payroll, maintenance, everything. And check the other stores under Paul's oversight. Paul's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, but James didn't flinch. We're not assuming anything, but we're not ignoring anything either. The meeting stretched another hour, hammering out details. Anonymous surveys would roll out within days, and James would lead unannounced visits to at least 3 stores himself. As the team dispersed, Paul lingered, his expression unreadable. You're making a big move, James, he said quietly. Hope you're ready for what you find. The words weren't a threat, but they weren't friendly either. James held his gaze. I'm ready, are you? Back in his office, James pulled up the audit report again. The numbers didn't lie. $2,300 in tips unaccounted for over 6 months at store number 7, and maintenance funds diverted to miscellaneous expenses. Michael's signature was on every questionable transaction. James's gut twisted. Theft was bad enough, but if Paul had known, if he'd let it slide, the betrayal ran deeper than one store. He forwarded the report to Claire with a note. Rush this, and keep it between us. That afternoon, James returned to store number 7, unable to stay away. The atmosphere was lighter without Michael, but tension lingered. Lisa Bennett was settling into her interim role, her calm presence a stark contrast to Michael's tyranny. She showed James the new schedule fare, predictable shifts, with Sophie's hours adjusted to accommodate her pregnancy. "It's start," Lisa said, "but some folks are still scared. Jenny's been stirring things up, saying you'll leave and nothing will change." James frowned. Jenny's phone call to Michael yesterday wasn't a one-off. She was undermining him, feeding doubt to the staff. He found her at the drink station, her movements sluggish, her eyes avoiding his. "Jenny," he called, his tone even. "Got a minute?" She froze, then forced a smile. "Sure, boss." Her sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable in the break. "Room." James didn't mince words. "I know you're talking to Michael. What's he saying?" Jenny's smile faltered, her fingers clutching her phone. "Just checking on him. He was good to me." James leaned forward. "Good to you, maybe. Not to Sophie, Ethan, or the others. If you're working against this store, you're on the wrong side." Jenny's eyes flashed, but she didn't respond, slipping out with a mumbled excuse. James made a mental note. Jenny was a liability, and he'd deal with her soon. Later, he checked in with Sophie, who was wiping tables. "Things feel different," she admitted, her voice soft. "Lisa's fair, but some of us are waiting for the other shoe to drop." Michael always came back harder when he got mad. James nodded, understanding her fear. "He's not coming back, Sophie. And I'm not going anywhere until this is right." She offered a small smile, the first he'd seen from her as James left the store. His phone buzzed, an anonymous email forwarded by Claire. "Check store number 12's payroll. The manager's docking hours like Michael did. And he's Paul's guy." James's grip tightened on his phone. Paul's oversight wasn't just negligence. It was a pattern. The system he trusted was crumbling, and the fight to rebuild it was just beginning. James Carter stood in the parking lot of Sunrise Bites store number 7, the neon sign now glowing steadily after a maintenance crew replaced its faulty wiring. 2 weeks had passed since his confrontation with his executive team, and the anonymous email about store number 12 still burned in his mind. Another manager, another pattern of abuse, another failure under Paul Anderson's watch. The audit of store number 7's finances had confirmed his suspicions. Michael Hayes had siphoned $2,300 in tips and misallocated maintenance funds, a betrayal that pointed to deeper cracks in Sunrise Bites' foundation. James had launched a company-wide review, and the results were trickling in, each one a gut punch. But today, he wasn't just here to fight fires. He was here to build something better. Inside store number 7, the atmosphere had shifted. The lunch rush hummed with purpose, not panic. Lisa Bennett, now interim manager, moved between stations, offering calm instructions. Sophie Miller, promoted to lead cashier, handled the register with a quiet confidence. Her pregnancy no longer a burden, but a point of pride. Ethan Brooks, who'd caught James's eye for his resilience, was training a new hire, his voice steady and encouraging. The fryer, once a smoking hazard, purred smoothly, and the schedule board was a model of clarity shifts posted 2 weeks out, fair and predictable. James allowed himself a small nod. This was progress, but it was fragile. The anonymous surveys had come back, and the picture they painted was grim. 6 stores, including number 12, reported managers mirroring Michael's tactics: bullying, wage docking, favoritism, safety violations, faulty equipment. Ignored complaints cropped up in 3 locations. One store had employees working off the clock to meet quotas, a practice that broke James's heart and possibly the law. He didn't hesitate. He hit the road, visiting the worst-performing stores unannounced. Just as he had at store #7. At store number 12, he met Ryan Phillips, a manager who shrugged off complaints with, "These kids don't take the job seriously." James fired him on the spot, his voice cold. Your job was to lead, not break them. Pack your things. At store number 9, Amanda Clark, another manager, deflected blame. High turnover is normal. If they can't handle it, they leave. James didn't waver. You failed them. You're done. By month's end, 4 managers were gone, 2 others on probation with mandatory leadership training. James wasn't just cleaning house. He was rebuilding it. Replacing bad leaders was only half the battle. James scoured his workforce for those who'd shown grit and heart. At store number 7, he'd seen Ethan Brooks hold the line despite Michael's tyranny. During a visit, James pulled him aside. "You've been running this place without the title," he said. "How about you make it official?" Ethan blinked, hesitant. "I've never managed a store before." James smiled. "You've been doing it for months. You just didn't get paid for it." Ethan accepted, and within days, he was store. #7's new manager. His promotion a signal to others. Loyalty and respect would be rewarded. Across the company, James promoted from within wherever possible. At store number 14, a shift supervisor named Maria, who'd returned after quitting under a toxic manager, took over as interim lead. Her story mirrored Sophie's single mom, stretched thin, but fierce in her dedication. James saw potential in people who'd been overlooked, and he gave them the chance to shine. Turnover began to slow, and customer satisfaction scores climbed. Post-on-X shifted from complaints to cautious praise. Sunrise Bites number 7 is killing it lately. Fast service, friendly staff. What changed? But not everything was smooth. Paul Anderson's resistance lingered, his emails curt, his oversight of the surveys half-hearted. James confronted him privately after finding discrepancies in store number 12's payroll, signed by Paul's protégés. "You knew about this, James." Sod, his voice low. "You let it slide." Paul's face reddened. "I didn't know the extent. I trusted my managers." James leaned forward. "That's the problem. You trusted the wrong people." Paul resigned the next day, his departure quiet but telling. Megan Foster stepped up, her proactive approach a stark contrast. She pushed for regular site visits and employee feedback, aligning with James's vision. The financial audit uncovered more than Michael's theft. 2 other stores showed similar patterns, small sums siphoned, budgets misreported. James turned the evidence over to legal, ensuring accountability. He also set up a direct line for employees to report concerns anonymously, bypassing managers. No one should feel trapped again, he told Claire Thompson, who was now overseeing the new feedback system. Claire nodded, her notebook filled. With plans to expand training and support, James returned to store number 7 one afternoon, slipping in during a lull. Sophie spotted him and smiled a real smile, not the cautious one from before. "Things are better," she said, wiping down the counter. "Lisa listens. Ethan's great. New hires aren't quitting after a week." She paused, her hand on her stomach. "I was going to leave, before you came. The stress was too much. Now, I think I'll stay." James nodded, warmth spreading through him. "You ever think about management?" he asked. Sophie laughed, a light sound. "Maybe one day. I'm taking an online course, now business basics. My daughter's due soon, but after..." Her voice trailed off, hopeful. James grinned. "When you're ready, let me know." As he left, Ethan caught him at the door. "Heard about the other stores," he said. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" James nodded. "I have to. This company's supposed to mean something." Ethan clapped his shoulder, a gesture of respect. Outside, James glanced back at the restaurant, its windows glowing with life. Store number 7 wasn't perfect, but it was healing. And it was proof that change was possible. Back at headquarters, James received a new report. Store number 3 was flagging issues: low morale, scheduling problems. The fight wasn't over. He grabbed his keys, ready for another unannounced visit. Sunrise. Bites was his legacy, and he'd make it right, store by store, person by person. This story of James Carter and Sunrise Bites is more than a tale of corporate reform. It's a testament to the power of empathy and accountability. James's journey began with a single letter from Sophie, a cry for help that could have been ignored. Instead, he chose to listen, to step into her world, and to confront the failures of his own leadership. The humanism lies in his recognition that every employee, Sophie, Ethan, Maria, is a person with dreams, struggles, and worth. By valuing them, he didn't just save his company. He restored their dignity. The lessons are clear. True leadership isn't about power or profit. It's about responsibility. James learned that distance breeds blindness, and trust in systems can betray the people they're meant to serve. For us, the story challenges us to look closer at our workplaces, our communities, our own actions. Are we listening to those who need us? Are we standing up to injustice, even when it's uncomfortable? Change starts with one person willing to act, just as James did. If this story moved you, there's more to discover. Subscribe to Legacy Stories on YouTube, where we share tales of courage, redemption, and transformation. Join us to hear more about people who dare to make a difference. Your support keeps these stories alive. Hit that subscribe button and be part of the journey.